I want to personally welcome all of you for being here. I know how hard it is as a caregiver to leave the person that the patient that you're taking care of, and I really appreciate the fact that you are here with us tonight. I would like to get a show of hands, if I could, of how many people have been doing caretaking for under a year. So that's about a third of you. You're all sitting together. And how about how many people have been caretaking for a year to 5 years? This is really strange how this is working out. It's a third in a little diagonal. And over 5 years? Or 5 years or over? Over 5 years? Okay. Maybe a couple of you. You're trying to figure that out. Okay. As the sole caregiver for my husband, who for the last almost 5 years, I've come to think of caregiving as kind of a balancing act. On the one hand, there are the priorities and the needs that are very, very evident of the patient. And on the other hand, are the priorities and needs and kind of the life that we have as caregivers that often goes unnoticed. To stay healthy and sane, we need, and I need, to make sure that I stay in touch with who I am outside of a caregiver. Because if I just focus on being a caregiver, I have nothing left in my life and I have nothing to give to my husband. Another way of saying this is if I spend 100% of my time, energy, physical energy, emotional energy on my husband, I can't really be a good caregiver. And it's a really important thing that I have to remember all the time. It's a constant reminder for me because it's really easy to get pulled into what's happening in their life, which seems so critical. And then I really can't take care of them at all. I think of taking care of someone as kind of an art because it's just this constant flow of taking care of yourself and taking care of them, and both are equally important. And it's easy to forget as a caregiver because people spend so much time thinking about the patient. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how I got into this place in my life, which is permanent now. In January of 2009, my husband and I were living fairly normal, what we thought was normal lives. My husband was working for a company, a project management company what he did was he managed construction projects, construction of large firehouses and public works buildings. I had my own business developing training programs for companies up and down the West Coast. We lived in this really charming little house. It was a little cabin in the woods on 7.5 acres. Our dream was to rebuild and build the home of our dreams. We had 3 dogs, and those dogs were our family. And we just thought we were just, going along, and that's where we were going to be. And then the only problem was that my husband was tired a lot. And he was tired a lot. And so we went through a series of internists who didn't seem to be paying enough attention to him. And we finally found an internist that just ran some routine tests and then called one day and said, you have some really interesting results. And in that conversation, I learned that you never want a doctor to tell you that you're interesting, because it's really not a good sign. And so we spent this is January of 2009, we spent the next couple of months going from specialist to find out what was making these tests so interesting. And I'm going to fast forward now, April 27th, 2009, a day that was a marker in my life and my husband's life. We sat in the examining room of a hematologist. I didn't know at the time that a hematologist was an oncologist. And And she said a whole bunch of things that sounded like kind of introductory gobbledygook to me. And I don't remember any of it because the last thing I remember her saying is looking at my husband and saying to him, "You have cancer." And it was a life-changing moment for all of us. When she said it, I remember sitting there thinking to myself, just don't say a word. This is not something that you can comment on. This is his life. He has to figure out how to deal with this, and whatever I'm feeling is not something that I need to burden him with, and it's really not about me. It's really about him. Well, I had absolutely no idea of how completely wrong I was about how this wasn't about me. Because once somebody has a diagnosis, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, once someone has a diagnosis, everybody in their family is in some way diagnosed with that disease. And in that moment, we were no longer just a couple. My husband Keith became the patient, and I became the caregiver. And our relationship and our lives were forever changed. Over the past 5 years, I've really struggled with how to be a really responsible caregiver, and also have the time and energy to take care of my own needs. And I will tell you that I don't think there's any easy fix. I don't think there's any answer that we're all going to find that's just going to say, this is the way you do it. I think that every day is a new experience. And I'll be happy later to hear what your experiences are, but I have found that it's a struggle every day. Some days you do better and some days you don't. Even at the beginning of this, what I think of as this journey, which is the rest of my life, I knew that I didn't want to it wasn't healthy for me to put all of my energy into my husband and his care, although sometimes that's all I could do. And so I thought, when people would say, well, take care of yourself. So I would eat well, and I would sleep enough hours, and I would do exercise, and I would talk to my friends, and I would go to a lot of caregiving seminars. And still, I think that the problem that I was having in trying to feel comfortable with what I was doing, besides the fact that my husband was seriously ill, was I really didn't spend time focusing on me as a person, what brought me joy and what brought meaning to my life. Even for a moment, I was so consumed with taking care of him that I didn't separate those two things. And to me, if there's anything, that's the key to finding some kind of balance in your life. And I do think that we need to find that balance. To make this even more challenging, my husband he wasn't really treated for the first year. He was kind of asymptomatic, and the kind of cancer he has, you don't really have to do anything unless you are symptomatic. So he chose, probably in a very healthy way for him, to kind of ignore the fact that he had cancer and just keep going on with his life. And he didn't really pay attention to it. And because of who I am, which is someone who, if you give me a project, I really want to take care of it, which helps him, but it's very hard on me. What I ended up doing was making this a huge research project, and I found out everything I could about the disease and what the progression might be. And I interviewed people that had the disease, which it's very rare, and I had to go all over the country to find people. And so I spent a lot of energy, which kept me feeling like I was in control of something, but really I was exerting a lot of energy in his direction and not in mine. By the time that we got through a year of chemo, which was after the first year of just what they call watching and waiting, and then a year of chemo, I was exhausted. I didn't have any more energy, I was overwhelmed, I was depressed, and I was really resentful about this whole process. These are all clues, by the way, that I was doing too much. And there are also clues that I wasn't paying enough attention to me. And so one of the learnings from all this is that you don't want to neglect yourself. You really want to make sure that you're not doing caregiving 24/7. So what does this look like? It's very difficult to be able to deal with the crisis and think, well, how can I take time for myself? I'm in the hospital with him. I am making arrangements for appointments. I'm driving him places. I didn't know how to do that. And it took me a really long time to find out that I could even just take a moment here and there. And that would make me feel like I was more whole, that there was some meaning in my life other than just taking care of him. So, I'm going to give you an example of something that you might do that someone shared with me that could bring a moment of peace to your life. I was talking to a friend about how hard it was to find this kind of balance, and she said to me, "Well, do you meditate?" And I said, "Oh my God, people tell you to meditate all the time, and I just don't know where to begin. And I know I've taken classes on meditation, and you're supposed to meditate, and it's supposed to make you feel better, but all it does is make more stress for me." And so I thought, well, I can't take 45 minutes to meditate a day. I can't take a half an hour. I can't even take 10 minutes. So she kind of laughed at me, and she said, "Well, you could do it a different way." And what she suggested was that I buy a bag of Hershey Kisses. This is going to sound a little corny, but stay with me. Buy a bag of Hershey Kisses, and take yourself into a room with a Hershey Kiss. Make it a quiet room. Unwrap your Hershey Kiss. Sit down, and it doesn't matter if it's on a chair or on the floor. Just sit down somewhere comfortable. Unwrap the Hershey. Pop the Hershey into your mouth. Close your eyes and just enjoy it. And so for as long as you can sit there with that Hershey Kiss, you're going to love that moment. And it's a moment that's just about you. And it's a way of really, really getting in touch with, I don't need to take care of anybody else but me. And so, would you mind circulating this? I have brought Hershey Kisses for you all, and you don't have to do it right now, but just take a handful. And when you feel like it, remember that you can take a moment to take care of yourself. The other thing that I'm going to suggest is that my husband and I were very, very fortunate. We have an oncologist, and it took us 3 oncologists to find this oncologist, but an oncologist that we really work with very well. And during the time that my husband was in treatment, it was really obvious that we were both really struggling just to keep some kind of balance in our lives. So he referred us to a therapist, and this therapist really focuses on people who are going through chronic illnesses and need a way to find balance in their life, find a way to stop thinking just about the disease. And so that's really what we have been doing for the last couple years. Is every couple weeks we spend time with this woman, and she just kind of keeps us a little bit, she kind of corrects our course. And it's been miraculous, so that our conversations are no longer just about cancer. Our conversations really are back to living life. And that's really what you're trying to do, is find a way to live your life with the disease and not be the disease. I'm going to also tell you that I don't think, in my limited experience, I do not think that there is a map or a GPS system or anything that can tell you how to do this. I really believe that everyone has to find their own course, and there are a lot of resources available. And believe me, I have been to a lot of courses. And I have tried a lot of things, and I will continue to do that. Because I think that sometimes things work for you one day and they don't work for you another day. And I'm going to suggest to you that you keep trying, because the goal is to really make sure that you're living your life and you're not just the caregiver. Don't identify too closely with being a caregiver, or you're going to not be a good caregiver. We're ready.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So, my question right now is, hearing this and living this at this moment, how present is my moment?
Microphone's turned off.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. In this moment right now, if you ask yourself how present you feel, if you go from a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your presence in this moment? Let's take a minute to find out. Are you thinking about work or what you need to do at home? Or are you totally focused on this moment? Or where are you in between? And then I'm going to do a little exercise, one of those great meditation things.
It's not going to have chocolates.
You can have one of the chocolates if you want. So if you're holding anything, you can put it down, or if you are trying to take notes, you can let it go. And if you're willing to just close your eyes for a moment and take a breath. That first breath is pretty marvelous, actually, if you can relax into it. And what I'm going to do is just give a description of the things that I notice as I'm going through this. And what you do while I'm describing that is see what you notice. So I feel the air in my nostrils. I feel my lungs expanding. I notice my arms are on the table. I feel my feet connecting with my shoes and the floor. I feel a sigh. And I hear the air conditioning. And I feel my sit bones connected to the chair. And I can feel my heart beating. I notice that I'm a little bit hungry. And I hear a train. And I feel my legs next to each other. And the warmth of the room. And I hear the door. You take a breath and release it. And then when you feel you're ready, slowly open your eyes. And then connect with yourself again about how present you feel. Is there a difference from before, about 3 minutes ago, and now? And what are those differences for you? And if you had the Hershey's Kiss, that might have been nice too. Did anybody notice a difference? Yes? It feels good, yes. Anything else?
It's calm.
Yes. Feels calm, it feels good. And you feel many times more centered. And it's such a short period of time. And those walks down the corridor, you can do this same kind of thing. You don't have to have your eyes closed, you can have them open. You notice when I was going through these things, I didn't talk about my story about, oh, I feel hungry because I didn't eat, or any of the story. I just noticed, oh, I have a sensation. I've done this with groups before where I'll bring in people of the audience and ask them to go over what they're noticing, and many times somebody will say, oh, my bladder feels full, or this or that, and it can be an interesting conversation afterwards. But it's just really getting into your body that I think makes a big difference. And just like with the Hershey's Kiss, it's a way to take a moment and be in your body, which we get out of so much during these times when there's so much on us and so much we're thinking about. So I like to think about it as your presence is a present. So it's a present not only to you, but to everyone who's around you. Because when you're centered and when you're calm, when it feels good, it not only feels good to you, it feels good to them as well. Right? And because we're talking about maintaining a healthy relationship, and it is incredibly difficult. I mean, it's difficult when everybody's healthy. You know, we're so busy, you know, we don't do things quite the way we used to do. Yes, work and the internet and every other thing that's competing for us. So when you add in this situation where someone has a diagnosis and you're a caregiver, it really ramps up what's happening. So one of the things I like to think about with maintaining a healthy relationship is, what is a healthy relationship? And the software project manager part of me, the old part of me, would say, well, let's define it. I want to know if I'm going to go for a big goal, if I want a healthy relationship, how do I know that I'm getting that? So really, the only person who can define what a healthy relationship is you, for you. You know, the things that make you happy, the way that things happen that make you happy, the things that you don't do anymore that you would like to do. How do you bring those in so that you can have those moments of joy that Bev was talking about? So one of the things that I loved, it's been out for a while now, but there's a book called The 5 Languages of Love. Dr. Chapman talks about different ways that people receive love. And he'll say there's words of affirmation, there's gifts of service, there's physical touch. There's all kinds of ways that people think that they really receive love when you do these things. So one of the things that I notice is, with my significant other, I like to go dancing. It's a nice thing, it's fun for me. I don't have to do it all the time, but I noticed I really enjoyed it. So when I read Dr. Chapman's book, I said, why do I enjoy this so much? Well, because the primary way that I feel love from my partner is physical touch. I like to hold hands, I like an arm around me, you know, so dancing, that's great. And I have a secondary language that I like to spend time with my partner. So when I talk to people about, well, what are you not doing that you used to love doing, and why? And if you can't go out dancing anymore, if I can dance in my house, I will definitely put on the music and I will dance in the house. If I can't dance in the house, I'm going to find a way to cuddle up next to that partner and put on some music and maybe talk about some time when we were dancing. Or tell him that I have a lot of gratitude for those times that he took me dancing, and I knew he was tired and he didn't really want to go and didn't understand why I wanted to go. Little things like that to make it intimate, to make it an event, a new kind of memory with the same kind of needs being met in there. So I think that is a wonderful exploration to see what's on the inventory of things that we just don't do anymore because we think we can't. So another thing I think is really important is having a signal with your partner. And by that I mean, as Bev said, there are a lot of ups and downs, and times when you're doing pretty well, and times when your energy is low, their energy is low, and you have to communicate a lot of really important things, a lot of feelings, a lot of things that you don't normally have to do. And what happens if one of you is not listening? So I like to have a signal with my partner that says, okay, whenever this happens, it means we stop. We stop everything and we totally listen to the person who calls that signal. With the last person I was caregiver with, we just had a peace sign, and that said, whoever raised that, the other person totally quiet, and we work out whatever it is that needs to be worked out. And I can tell you that saves so many situations because of the number of roles that we play. And especially when women are caregivers, it's easy to become like the mommy. Did you take your medication? Did you eat? Did you not eat this thing that you were supposed to eat? Why did you order bacon? It all. Yes, yeah. It's incredible, and the person, is also trying to live their life, the person with a diagnosis, and who wants to eat broth, every day for a month after month after month. And you go to visit them in the hospital and they say, hey, can you bring me up some KFC? What do you say to that, right? And what's the right thing to do? And when do you know when you should actually smuggle in the KFC and hope nobody smells it, right? In closing, I want to make sure that there's a lot of time, but I just want to reiterate how important you are. How very important you are, and how important it is to have places like this where caregivers are talking to other caregivers, that you're using each other as resources, that patients use each other as resources. I used to use a tool when my kids were small. If I was trying to tell them something, kids don't like to listen to their mom. Their moms are not very smart. Oh my gosh, my kids might see this. I would tell a teacher or a friend's mother or someone else that they respected what I was trying to work on with my kids, and then I would use them to help reinforce my message. So sometimes it's good if you can find a team of people to support you, not just in giving of time, but also in a real kind of supportive way that, if you need to have something brought up and you're having a problem, finding a different way to do it, they may have just the solution for you. So thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do and for taking good care of yourself.
Good deal. Well, so, gosh, you guys are hard to follow. So what I'd like to do is just make sort of some general comments, and I think I'm probably going to sound a little professorial. So I guess I want to talk a little bit out of my kind of being a, kind of researcher or teacher, shrinky kind of person, and talk with you a bit about some ways of thinking about yourself, about the person you're giving care to, and kind of how to do that, and then sort of highlight some things that both of you folks have said, and kind of encourage you to follow their lead. So one thing that I wanted to share, because certainly in my practice and kind of in my own caregiving life, who of us kind of aren't caregivers these days in a variety of ways? I made a profession out of it and got licensed to be a caregiver. But one of the things I think we have to think about is what is kind of our style of going about kind of understanding ourselves and understanding crisis and pressure and trying to understand other people. And one of the ways that we all, just as human beings, kind of our psychologies, do that is we sometimes call it the thinking, feeling, doing styles. There's actually even a therapy game for kids calling the thinking, feeling, doing game. It's just sort of how we're wired up psychologically, emotionally, that we all have certain capacities or ways of sort of going about our life. And particularly when we're in crisis, we tend to kind of lock into one of these three categories. So let me just say what they are. They kind of are pretty descriptive, but one is the thinking category, and not to diss men, but I think we tend to be more the thinkers. We tend to, in crisis or in a situation that we don't understand, that's brand new to us, a new diagnosis, a new role, a new something, we tend to try to kind of first think it out, try to understand it, tell ourselves a story, do a lot of research, hop on the internet, talk to 18 doctors, fly to 3 other places in the world. And this is all good. Nothing wrong with that. Then there are kind of more the feeler folks who sort of in a state of, crisis, a new situation, kind of begin interacting with it out of their emotions, a feeling. And that is really great too. That's great. And then there are really the doers. A lot of professional caregivers are also doers. And these are the folks who are going to immediately get a plan of action and kind of go for it. I'm going to do these 3 things, and that's what we're going to do. Now, in our role as caregivers, probably particularly in a state of crisis, which I would say that caregiving is perhaps a bit of a kind of persistent state of crisis or pressure, because most of us are probably caring for somebody whose situation is moving around, symptoms come and go, treatment come and go, reoccurrences come and go, new medications pop up on the scene, a research study hits the airwaves of the internet. There's always something different. So I guess what I'd like to do is just to suggest is we might kind of think of who we are in these categories and know that we probably default to 1 or 2 of those pretty quickly, and particularly in states of high pressure or high crisis. And that is fine. I just have to kind of say, no one of those is better than another. They're all effective, and of course what we really need to do is to figure out which 1 or 2, or how can we combine them by looking at other, grab a friend who's more of a feeler and I'm a thinker, let's together talk this through, or let's get a thinker, feeler, and a doer in the room at the same time. That's really great. It's why we often, recommend that when you go to the, see an oncologist or a doctor or whatever your particular diagnosis is, great to take more than 1 person. That one of it is just there's more people to think and more ears and more memory in the room. But actually, I think it's also because we're all taking in information in different ways, and better to have all of that and then try to pool it. Now, the trick is of course, we can be in conflict, and this is often, friends, couples, caregivers, and the person they're caregiving can really be in conflict. Like, man, we've got to do we're doing the macrobiotic diet now because I have researched that, and that's going to be the diet that's going to just pull you through. That chemotherapy will not make you sick, or that, physical therapy will not hurt if you just eat brown rice and rice cakes. I think we're really going to pull through this. You'll do well, because I'm a doer. I've come up with that plan. I throw a little thinking in there, and they're kind of going, I don't feel so good when I'm doing that. It's really kind of comforting to me to have a, Jamba Juice or a mocha frappuccino before I go into chemotherapy. It just feels good. And you're thinking, mocha frappuccino or KFC? What are you thinking? So anyhow, I just wanted to kind of throw out this thinking, feeling, doing, and would be curious as we move along kind of more to the discussion, if you notice kind of what your style is, and if that's ever in conflict with kind of the person that you're loving and caring for. Another point wanted to make, sort of building on what Jane and Bev had said, is we those of us sort of in the kind of mental health field and medical fields have done a lot of thinking and research. There's just gobs of it about the kind of the outcomes, the problems that can arise with kind of persistent psychological and physical distress. And, it's big. And I think it's why we all, at talks like this and discussions, and probably every nurse and physician and person you've been in contact has always said, take care of yourself, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. And it really is important. We know that cortisol levels shoot up, blood pressure is higher more persistently, on and on and on. Certain parts of the brain operate differently. At the same time, I am sort of a proponent of not getting too judgmental about ourselves. So I think to take care of yourself, but also to recognize many of us are in a persistent, stressful situation, and we're probably doing the best we can. We need to kind of keep at all of the things we're doing, chocolate candies and meditation, and I'm going to talk some about kind of my thoughts about that from a kind of psychological perspective. But also to kind of recognize that we're all doing the best we can. I guess I just want us all to sort of be able to kind of to say that. That doesn't mean we can't do better, and that's really good too. And sometimes I think we might want to be committed to what might sound like two very conflicting kind of approaches or goals, but that's all right too. So we're doing the best we can, and we're going to, any opportunity we can to do a little bit more, do a little bit better, we're going to do that. So next to the last thing I wanted to talk about was my laundry list of problems that I often hear about. I think Bev and I talked about this a little bit on the phone when we were thinking together about the presentation tonight. And it goes to some of what both of you folks were saying earlier. This notion again, in my kind of little psychology kind of mind, we talk about roles and identities. And we all have lots of roles. One of the roles is caregiver. We're also a teacher. We're also a whatever. We're a mom, we're a dad, we're a brother, we're a sister, we're a friend, we're a church member. We have lots and lots of roles in our life. The problem sometimes with caregivers is the role then becomes our identity. This happens with patients too, where like I'm no longer, whoever I am, Tom with a diagnosis of such and such. I also happen to do some work still. I used to do this. I have a son, I have a daughter. But suddenly I'm the melanoma patient. And I think we have to be very careful that the roles we play, including the roles of a diagnosis or the role of a caregiver, does not become who we are. Obviously, it's becoming, at times, very predominant in our lives, and maybe taking up a lot of time in every moment of our thinking and planning and whatever. But very much, I think, as Bev and Jane were pointing out about, we need to kind of be able to stretch our life back out sometimes and back into remembering that we are a number of other things. And in my experience, both personally and professionally, that both caregivers and the ones we're caring for actually do better if we can do that, because it kind of gets back into like some resemblance of normal living, that sometimes, kind of us, moaning and groaning about our job and the guy who cut us off on the freeway, and, my credit card didn't work in the gas station. That's kind of like a reminder. I think it can sometimes be quite comforting to remember that, yeah, there's life out there, it's going on. It's still going on. Yes, you do have whatever disease. Yes, you are going into chemotherapy tomorrow. Yes, your Metaport is infected and we don't know if we're going to be able to access it again, whatever it might be. But good that we don't take on an identity as a caregiver. It's one of the roles we play. It's an important one, and it might be quite consuming at any moment, but it's not all of who we are. We're lots of other things with lots of other connections and attachments. Then I'm just going to, because I'm a shrink, I like to talk about guilt. It's really kind of good. Woody Allen's done quite well with making movies about it. But I think guilt for caregivers and in families is real. It just happens. Again, it's not a problem. We're not like all pathologic because we feel guilty. But let me just talk with you about different kinds of guilt, I think, that kind of pop up pretty frequently. And again, later on as we're talking, if you want to kind of talk about your favorite form of guilt, that would be great. One guilt which we call it survivor guilt. A lot of people have probably heard of this. Just historically, it's a kind of term that came about around World War II and shortly after. But it's a kind of guilt that many of us feel because we don't have some horrible thing going on that another person does. It's the one where we look across the street and go, oh gosh, thank goodness my son wasn't arrested last night for, getting drunk at a party. And then the next thing we think of is, oh my God, how guilty am I? My son is doing great and getting straight A's, and their son is getting arrested. This can happen a lot too, I think, with people who have, acute and chronic illnesses, and that, well, I don't have melanoma, or I don't have chronic pain syndrome, and almost feel kind of guilty because our life is kind of bopping along kind of okay. Again, kind of natural, normal, but we don't want to kind of get stuck in that for all kinds of reasons that we can talk about later if you want. Very related to this is what I call kind of comparison guilt. Like, he has this, but I only have that. I hear that one of the people I'm very kind of connected to is getting pretty frequent chemotherapy infusions in an infusion center. And when I'm sort of sitting with this person, because I'm really nosy, I'm listening to every conversation I can possibly pick up in the room. And I often hear whispers as infusion people are looking across the room going, oh my gosh, look, I'm not throwing up and they are. I'm feeling guilty. Or, my goodness, it's taken them 8 times to try to access that port. Mine, I could probably do one-handed, not a problem. We do a lot of this comparison. Now, what we know is actually our brains are wired up to do this kind of thing, so we can't stop doing it. But the problem in it, again, is we start feeling so guilty about ourselves in comparison to another person, not going to work too good. Whether it's within our kind of our own families and our caregivee, or, you know, in this kind of bigger thing like infusion centers and doctors' offices and whatnot. Related to this is this notion sometimes of this survivor guilt and comparison guilt, and I think caregivers, I think we were talking a little bit about this too, is, you know, that you can't complain about anything. I mean, how can I complain? You know, you're, you know, throwing up and you're like in agonizing pain or having headaches or whatever condition that is, you know, the acute and chronic condition. How can I complain that they were out of my favorite orange juice, you know, when I went into, you know, the grocery store today? Or how can I complain that I thought we had a meeting that was really important and I went there and 3 people didn't show up? You know, I can't complain about that. I've got to stop that. And I think, again, this could be really, well, it can seem compassionate, and I think sometimes it is. It's not sort of like, I don't think we would want to say, oh, you're throwing up, and by the way, 3 people didn't show up today. I mean, you know, you get, and, but I think we do need to, again, in this way of just having kind of normal lives, being normal people, and also making sure that we're all still connected with the real world that goes on out there. And the real world includes people getting really horrible diagnoses. It includes people getting really sick. It includes people, in order to get well, having to undergo really horrendous treatments and surgeries and whatever. That it is still the real world, and it's good to kind of keep out there and keep connected. And complaining, kind of, it's kind of what we do. I mean, you know, that's okay. Now, then there's the I caused it guilt. You know, I mean, I hear this a lot with newly diagnosed patients. Like, I always knew I wasn't supposed to drink red wine. Or I always knew that I was only supposed to have 1 hamburger every month. I ate too much beef. Or I knew I wasn't supposed to use Febreze in the house because I remember reading somewhere that Febreze causes cancer. It's that somehow we've caused either our problems or somebody else's by some action we've taken. Again, this is, you know, we all do this, normal, everyday people do it. We don't have to be, you know, kind of psychologically unbalanced to do this. But I think it's worth kind of stepping back from that. It may be one way that we're trying to get a handle on horrible things happening. And that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to get a handle on why do horrible things occur. And if we can put a story to it, we often feel better off. But with few exceptions, we tend not to cause horrible things to happen in the world. And it's really sad that the world, horrible things happen. So let me just say then another plug about needing help, that caregivers need help. I think we should do some kind of a evening on caregiving for the caregiver, and we'll find those 3 people in the world who are not caregiving somebody else, and they could come in and we could talk with them. But you know, in the helping professions, this is kind of a cliche. We always talk about, you know, how does the caregiver get help and all that. But I think it is important to recognize when we do need some help, and I know this is really hard, and many of us have difficulty first doing the recognizing and then doing the actual kind of reaching out. But there are resources out there, and I think it's good for us to get really, really, really creative. And they don't have to be, there's all the formal resources. There's CARA, there's, you know, community activities like this. A lot of hospitals have support groups. There's all kind. Go on the internet and you'll come up with a list. And, there's therapists like me. You can kind of sit in an office for 50 minutes every week or whatever you want, which I think is great. But there are also, I think it's a good idea, sort of a little bit of what Jane was saying, is thinking about informal, the friends, taking 3 or 4 minutes before the book group starts to just kind of say a little bit or check in with a few people. Looking back, if you happen to be a member of a church, to see if there's something you could reconnect there that might give you some connection. I think it's worth looking at friends and really sometimes kind of reevaluating, or if not reevaluating, sort of rethinking about which friends offer what kind of support. One friend might be a great, let's go out to a movie. They do not want to talk about anything about cancer or about treatment. They'll, cringe and look the other way. While another friend wants to hear and know every detail, and you can talk about any of that with. So it's sort of like almost sort of divvying up your network of people to figure out who can offer you what kind of support, and then reaching out to those folks in a, in the way that's going to work best. So just one last plug, and then I'm going to stop as well, because I'd be much more interested in kind of talking with you guys about what's going on in your minds and hearts. And I just want to put a plug in because, and I have to say, 5 to 10 years ago, I would be really surprised if I would say this kind of thing here. And part of that's because of my training and probably my way I grew up and just the way I think. But in Western psychology, we are really borrowing a lot of kind of Eastern principles of kind of philosophies and Buddhism and whatnot. And we're not kind of taking them hook, line, and sinker. I mean, we're not starting any new cults that I'm aware of. But we are kind of looking at some of the approaches that seem to be quite helpful in combination with just us sort of Western-y sort of people about what works and what can be really helpful to our emotions, to our mood, to our, taking care of ourselves, to trying to keep our heads above water in the face of a lot of stress and adversity. And two of them, one has been demonstrated here tonight in 2 ways, both by Bev and by Jane, which is a mindfulness sort of approach. And I can talk more about that later, but Bev demonstrated it in the Hershey Kiss, which is just simply having a moment of focus in the moment using, appealing to some sense of yours. And Jane did a very similar thing in a different way, which is really, taking 2, 3, 4 minutes. This isn't, an hour of sitting meditation in a meditation room, of really just the part of mindfulness that we're excited about, and actually it's part of the research I'm doing, is applying it to simply being aware and noticing. It's not a clearing of one's mind or being in some state of nirvana. It's really using it to simply kind of focus for a moment, to be aware of what we're thinking and feeling. And actually it's not I'm just going to stop at that. So mindfulness. The other approach that I might just sort of put a plug in, and I can talk more, or you can go on the internet, is this notion of acceptance. And this is a tough one. I don't do it all that well, but I always challenge myself. And that is to find a way of not liking icky things and painful things that happen, stuff we don't like, but finding ways to acknowledge that they're there and not try to shield ourselves from it, fight against it, spend oodles of time being angry and frustrated and depressed and sad and convincing ourselves that it should never happen to us, or trying to think of how did I cause it, so then I'll have more control over it and I'll be able to explain it. But and I can talk about it more, but it is to find some ways of acknowledging even the ickiest, most painful things that are going on, so that we're in a better position to do something with them and about them. And it allows some of the pain, the what some people call suffering, to kind of go away, and is really quite empowering to then kind of take some action, do what's going to be most helpful and most effective.